And so if you weren't here last week, we were in the middle of a sermon series on the minor prophets. We're doing 2 weeks on each prophet, so this is the second preach on Amos. Last week I preached really on Amos the person and how he was deeply, deeply impacted by the roar of the Lion of Judah. You guys will remember that. If you weren't here, feel free to go and have a listen. We save all the sermons on our website and on YouTube. But a man that was deeply, deeply impacted by an encounter with Jesus. And an encounter that changed him from being a simple guy, maybe similar to that picture up there, a simple guy, to a powerful prophetic voice, speaking truth to power. And so that was something of last week. And the overarching question for us as we go through these prophets is this: what does it mean for us to become a prophetic people? What does it mean for us as individuals and for us as a church within the context that we find ourselves to become a prophetic people? That's the biggest question. And so Amos, the message of Amos, if we have to recap, when was he born and where did he work? He's prophesying around 750 years before Jesus came to the northern tribes of Israel. There's been about 200 years of corrupt leaders after the kingdom split into two. This is, you'll remember, King David and then King Solomon, and then the kingdom split into two. Just after that, Jeroboam and Rehoboam, I think, are the two kings. And it's been about 200 years of just the northern tribes especially just going down and down and down and down and doing all kinds of unimaginable things. Fantastic book, and I just put a quick punt out. If you haven't got this, Unlocking the Bible by David Pawson, excellent commentary on the Bible and background information. But basically what he just says is, listen, it's been a time of peace. I was going to read this now, but I think it's going to take too long. We won't start at the beginning and end at the end. It's a concordance, okay? You don't have to read it cover to cover. You read the section that you need. But basically what he says is there's been a time of peace. Assyria hasn't been as strong as they were. The threats haven't been so bad. There's been pretty good climate, and the crops have been growing. People have been getting a little bit richer. Society was doing quite well. No wars. But as people got more comfortable, they started drifting away from God and started really seeking their own pleasure and going after what makes them happy and going after financial gain at all costs, trampling on the poor and abusing people, and they've drifted away from God. And that's really part of the context in which Amos is prophesying. Let me get this big one out of the way. Thanks, Lucian. And so today we're going to speak on the message of Amos, and it can be summed up in 3 accusations and 2 invitations that God has for his people. And the 3 accusations, we're going to go through them now. The first one is infidelity, covenant unfaithfulness, breaking faith with God in their covenant with him. I don't know if you guys saw that viral video of a Coldplay concert. Who's seen the video of the Coldplay concert? Okay, you guys are all on YouTube and social media. That's good. Okay, so it's actually, it's not funny, but it's very funny. For those of you that didn't see it, there's a Coldplay concert, and they have this kissing camera where they kind of zoom in on the big screen on random people in the crowd. And then these guys have to kiss if they want to. And now sometimes these are couples and sometimes these aren't couples, and it's part of the show and part of the concert. The problem is when they zoomed into this couple, this was a man who had a wife back home and a woman that had a husband back at home. And when they saw themselves on the big screen, they made a dive for it to try and get out of the way. Please go and have a look at it if you haven't seen it. And it was a big story, and shame, the lead singer says, oh my goodness, these guys are so shy. Either they're having an affair or they're really shy. And then that thing just blew up. So the thing is, they were having an affair. They were having an affair. And at first they denied it, and they kind of said they just, it's nothing. But they've both lost their jobs and probably lost their marriages now. They were, the one was a CEO, and I think the other one is an HR manager in quite a big company in the US. See, they were unfaithful in their covenants to their spouses, but not only in their actions, but already the seed was planted in their hearts. You know, when you say your marriage vows, you say, "You are mine and I'm yours. I choose you above anyone else. I intentionally choose to honor and to serve and to give my life for you as a choice of my love until death do us part." Those are the marriage vows, right? Something like that. And one of the central themes in the Bible is that God has made a covenant with his people similar to marriage vows, similar to a marriage covenant. God is not a detached king that is living a life that is far removed from his people. No, God is like a husband who calls his people to be his bride. It's one of the central themes of the Bible. If you can catch that, you've caught something of who God is. And in chapter 3, verse 2 of Amos, I don't have the scripture here, he says, "You only have I known of all the families of the earth." He says, "I've chosen you. You're my bride. You're my special one. You're the one that I want to have close to me. You're my people, and I'll be your God. I'm your husband. You're my bride." Echoes of Exodus chapter 19 and chapter 20. God's special covenant people. And like a marriage covenant that has blessings, so too, this covenant between God and his people carry huge promise of blessing, of abundance, and of provision, and of protection, and of peace, and of good health, and good crops, of joy, of contentment in a land of their own. But on the other side of the blessing are the consequences and severe warnings of what happens when you break faith. See, if God's people break their covenant with him, they will begin to suffer the consequences of their infidelity, hardship, pain, sickness, drought, famine, wars. Ultimately, they will lose their land, he says. They'll lose many lives and they'll be sold as slaves in separation from God. Sounds like a bad divorce, right? You lose everything. There are no winners. Lots of pain. And God's accusation to his people, it says that you have not been faithful. You've been cheating. Just like that Coldplay couple. But worse. You see, the Coldplay couple were embarrassed. They were ashamed. And God says, you are brazenly sleeping around and thinking that it's okay. This has become normal for you. You're not even blushing. You're not even blushing. And this has been going on a long time. This is now 200 years since the kingdom split. And it's like God's people seem to think that either God doesn't see or he doesn't care. And God uses Amos to warn his people, saying that you have already experienced some of the pain. And he mentions earthquakes, and he mentions droughts, and he mentions the crops failing and this and that. He says you've already begun to experience the foretaste of this pain of the separation when you separate yourself from me. He says, but watch out, there's a lot more to come. And I shared more on this last week. He has this vivid picture that God is going to be like a lion that will tear into his people, and there will be utter destruction. He says, the Lion of Judah is roaring, and you are the target. That's the first accusation. The second one is injustice. See, if the previous accusation came from God speaking as a husband, the next one comes from God speaking as a king. The whole point of God's covenant with Israel was not that they would be only the beneficiary of his love and blessings, but that they would be the standout example among all the nations of the world of what a nation looks like that lives under the blessing of God. A nation that represents who God is to all the nations around them. And in Exodus chapter 20 to the end of Deuteronomy, if you know those sections of the Bible, you know there are lots and lots of laws. Some laws are about how to worship God and how to make this sacrifice and that sacrifice and when to come to the temple and when not to come and which priest should be doing what. Lots of laws around how to worship. But then there are lots of laws about morality in general, particularly about sexuality and about things like stealing. What is right and what is wrong? Don't move your neighbor's landmark. Lots of laws about morality in general. And then there are lots of social rules that are fair and beneficial to all. So things like rules that protect the poor, rules about looking after the widows, rules about leaving a portion of your land so that the poor people can come and glean, so that everybody would have food. Rules about the orphans, rules about how to do business, rules about parents and children, rules about how you should treat your employees. And so many laws that God gave them, but the purpose was to make sure that they are an inclusive society in which all people can flourish, no matter where they come from. An inclusive society that protects the poor and helps the rich not to dominate. And here's the accusation. The accusation is this: Israel sells the righteous for silver and the needy for a pair of sandals. They trample the head of the poor into the dust of the earth, and they turn aside the way of the afflicted. Can we have the scripture in the next slide? Amos 2 verse 6 is just one example. There's quite a few. It says, "For thus says the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Israel and for 4 I will not revoke this punishment, because they sell the righteous for silver and the needy for a pair of sandals. Those who trample the head of the poor into the dust of the earth and turn aside the way of the afflicted. A man and his father go into the same goal, so that my holy name is profaned. They lay themselves down beside every altar on garments taken in pledge, and in the house of their God they drink the wine of those who have been fined." I wonder what God would say to us today about injustice in our own society. What would God say about a living wage for laborers in this country? You know, where people do a full-time job, but you still can't afford to pay rent. How much does a security guard earn? I think it's around 2,000 Rand a month, maybe 3. It's not a lot. So you work 12-hour shifts, and at the end of all of that, you still can't eat. I know it's like that with my friends in Zim. You know, there are people that work full jobs as teachers and and then they come out with 1,500 Rand or 2,000 Rand at the end of the month. Am I right, Pinky? Yeah, you work in government service, you work as a civil servant, as a policeman. No wonder they're bribing. No wonder guys are trying to get an extra money from here. Because you work a full job, but at the end of it, you still can't eat. What would God say about injustice in our own society? Tender fraud and mafias that control people through fear. Gender-based violence. The exploitation of migrant workers from Zim, DRC, and Rwanda in this country. You know that like almost every Uber driver, almost every 60/60 driver doesn't have a contract, doesn't have medical insurance, doesn't have job security. If they don't pitch tomorrow, they don't get paid. Don't get sick leave. They're treated as contractors because there's a loophole within employment laws that prevents Uber from having proper employment contracts with these people. It's not right. It's not right. Checkers is milking it from 60/60, but they're workers they don't have to protect. What would God say about the entire weapons industry that arms both sides of every conflict so that they can benefit financially from the turbulence that it creates, from political instability? Think of DRC, the eastern side of DRC in Rwanda. How long has the war been going on there? Maybe 40 years. Who gives those weapons? And the king says to his people through Amos, his prophet, he says, those are not my values. That is not the kind of country that I want to be a king over. Something's got to change. That's not a kind of country that represents who I am. See, friends, God doesn't tolerate injustice. That's the second accusation. The third one is irreverence. God speaks as Yahweh, the one who is worthy of all worship and honor. There are many laws in the Old Testament that describe how people should worship God. Think about those laws about the Sabbaths and the festivals and the rituals. But the heart behind all the laws of worship is this, that true worship is a way of life, not a ceremony. True worship is not a ritual that you do on a Sunday morning and now you've fulfilled your worship, you tick your worship box. And see, Israel were way off track in their worship of God. They were worshiping God in the wrong way. They made 2 golden calves. You kind of think, how stupid can you be? The king, Jeroboam, after the kingdom split, he said, I don't want people to travel all the way to Jerusalem to go and worship there. Let me put up a golden calf in this city and in that city, so that people can rather come to a little more convenient place to go worship. Set up 2 golden calves. They set up shrines on every hill so that people can worship there. The wrong place, the wrong manner, the wrong God they worshipped. Because the golden calf was a representation of a Canaanite god. Amazing. The second way that they were off in their worship is actually the main problem, that their religious activities did not translate into a lifestyle of worship. So they were doing all the things and coming and doing festivals and Sabbaths and tithing and all of that, but it doesn't translate into a lifestyle that reflects who God is. And the word irreverence means a lack of respect. As an Afrikaner, I needed to just go double check that I understood it correctly. It means a lack of respect. See, Israel was worshiping God in a way that didn't show him the respect that he deserves. It didn't actually honor God. It didn't actually glorify God. But their worship was centered around their own self-preservation and their own comfort and their own preference. They were respecting their own morality and their own lifestyles, not God. And there are so many examples today of when we do the same. You pray at church, but you beat up your wife in the middle of the week. You come to church, but you're also drinking with your mates on the weekend. You attend home group, but you also smoke weed when you are stressed. You work for the church, but you've got a gambling problem that you're hiding from everyone. You're a leader in church, but also part of the Freemasons who try and control the politics and the economy for your own interest. You guys think this is all way out? I can put a name to all of those of people that I know personally, that I've journeyed with in the last 10 years. It's not way out. These are people that have been a part of this church. Irreverent worship. When we worship God on the outside, but on the inside our hearts are far away from Him. See, God is not interested in our ceremonies if it doesn't translate into a lifestyle, in a changed lifestyle. If it doesn't translate into a life which is whole. In any time of the week, somebody should be able to look at us and see, wow, that's a person that loves Jesus. Infidelity, injustice, and irreverence. Those are the 3 accusations. But there's also 2 invitations in the book of Amos. And the first is this: seek the Lord and live. Next slide, please. Seek the Lord and live. This is like a little bit of a refrain that comes out in chapter 5, particularly. Seek the Lord not just with your words, but with your actions. Change your lifestyle. And an example of this, and probably the most famous verse from the whole book of Amos, is chapter 5, verse 24. It says, let justice roll down like rivers, like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. That is your worship. And the message to us is we can't change our past. But your decisions today can shape your future. No matter how bad your past is or where you may find yourself, the invitation from God is an open-ended one. The Father is always appealing to His children and says, my son, my daughter, will you come back home? Seek the Lord and you will live. You know, if you change your lifestyle and you begin to put God first, your problems might not go away magically all at once. But you will begin to find freedom and joy and purpose. You will begin to see your relationships improve. You should begin to see your finances improved and your wholeness in your family. Bit by bit, when you begin to put God first, things change. Seek the Lord and live. And you see, the Israelites didn't take Amos up on that offer. I mentioned this last week, but 20 or 30 years after he preached, they were sent in chains to Assyria to become slaves there. They kicked Amos out. They said, you go and preach in your own country. We don't want you here. And they stayed exactly as they were. So the invite fell on deaf ears. And the question for us is, what will we do with an invite like that from God? Where He says, seek me, and you're going to find life. It's like a gift. You can only experience the blessing of the gift if you take it. If you leave it on the table, it stays on the table. And God's saying, I want to give you a gift, but please take it. Seek the Lord and live, and you will live. The second appeal, or the second invitation, is to appeal to the mercy of God. Now, there's an incredible story in chapter 7 where God shows Amos 2 visions of what He's about to do to His people. And it's so terrifying that Amos says, Lord, these guys are not going to survive this. This is too bad. No nation can survive this. And He says, Lord, please no. And you know what God does? He says, okay, Amos, I hear you. We're not going to go that way anymore. Twice. You see, Amos is so horrified by what he sees when he stares at the Lion of Judah roaring over his people about to attack, that Amos has the courage to look the lion in the eyes and say, please stop. And the lion says, okay. It's an incredible story. That God backs down and God changes His plans because of Amos's appeal. I've been so impacted as I was thinking about this and thinking about the mercy of God. And so many lessons. And one of them is this: God is not rigid. God is responsive. Think about that for a moment. God is a responsive God. He responds to us. He's not rigid. His character doesn't change. But God's plans can change. And He invites us to talk to Him. He invites us to process life with Him. He invites us to engage with Him. And when we do, He's open to changing His plans. It feels like you can't say that about God, but it says that about God in the Bible, so it must be true. And it highlights for me this opportunity that we have to engage with God in prayer, to petition God, to cry out for Him, to say, Lord, have mercy. And it highlights for me the hope that we have that when we pray, God actually hears. And things can actually change. The second thing that this highlights for me, so the first thing is that God is not a rigid God. God is a responsive God. But the second thing is that the mercy of God is far, far more powerful and far more available to us than I think we dare to imagine. See, though we deserve God's wrath, His mercy is on standby at all times, waiting to be activated. The mercy of God is an essential part of His character. It's who He is. He's not just the loving God. He is the God of mercy. Even in His extreme anger, His mercy is there. It's like His mercy is just beneath the surface, waiting to surface. And in the Old Testament, the Ark of the Covenant is where Moses kept a copy of the 10 Commandments. And basically it was a box made of wood, overlaid with gold, and they kept a copy of the 10 Commandments and one or two other things, I think some bread and some. And on top of it, there were 2 angels that symbolically shielded this covenant and covered it. But on top of the box, the lid was made from solid gold. You know what the lid was called? The mercy seat. And the Israelites believed that somehow God's presence rested on the mercy seat. See, God is not only just the lawgiver and the king, He's the king of mercy. He rules over His people from a place of mercy, from a disposition of mercy. That's His angle that He starts from. He doesn't start as the God who punishes. He starts as the God who is full of mercy. And in chapter 9, it's amazing. Amos has got 8 chapters that are quite hard to read. And then chapter 9, we get a glimpse of the mercy of God. We get a glimpse of that mercy. Within His extreme anger, He says the following, and I'm going to paraphrase. He says, I will shake the house of Israel. And He says, I will shake it like a sieve. But not one pebble is going to fall through that sieve. I will raise up and I will repair and I will rebuild my people in their own land. I will bring a season of peace and prosperity and restoration to my people. He says there's going to be a time when you're going to take those swords and beat them into farming utensils. You're not going to need your sword anymore. You get a glimpse of the mercy of God. Though His people don't deserve anything of that, yet God says, this is who I am. Friends, do we even have an idea of God's mercy? Do we dare to look into God's eyes when things look hard and when things look impossible? Do we dare to look into His eyes and say, Lord, have mercy. I've come to the end of myself. I've come to the end of my plans. But now, Lord, act in your mercy. Intervene. Thinking of impossible situations. Thinking of impossible relationships. Where you feel like you've hit an absolute dead end. Do we dare to imagine that when we appeal to God, those impossibilities will become possibilities? Lord, have mercy. Lord, have mercy. Again, I'm coming back to that picture of the lion. Imagine you staring a lion face to face and the lion's about to attack. You don't expect mercy. You expect this thing is going to go through with doing whatever he wanted to do. But somehow, Amos has the courage to look the lion in the face and say, stop, please stop. And the lion stops. And for me, that's just such a vivid picture of the mercy of God. Within the anger of the eyes of God, He sees the tear also that's crying and hurting for His own people. We see the emotion of God saying, yes, they deserve to be punished, but you know what? I love these people. They're mine. And I'll give myself for them. I'll do whatever I need. I'll do whatever it takes to get them back. The mercy of God. As we wrap up, our series goal and what we're trying to learn in this time is how to be a prophetic people. Of course, part of that is our engagement with the world and what we say and what we do. But the biggest part is that we become prophetic people in who we are. That we are impacted and shaped by the revelation of God that we have, and so that we become a changed people. And there are 4 things that are highlighted to me from this time and from the book of Amos. You can put that up, the next slide. Covenant faithfulness to God, number 1. God has paid the bride price for us. He is our husband. In some cultures here, we pay lobola, right? When you've paid lobola, your wife is yours. And God says, I've paid my bride price. You guys are mine. I've bought your freedom. You belong to me. And God is never unfaithful to us. He never breaks the covenant. The question is, will we be faithful to God? Will we be faithful to God? And when we do that, we will experience the blessing and abundance that He promises for us. The second thing that's highlighted is uncompromised relationships. If there's any sense of compromise in your relationship within your family, to your spouse, to your parents, to your children, we all live in covenant relationships, right? Can I just say, if there's any seed that is planted in your heart or in your behavior, things that are busy breaking those covenant relationships apart, can we take action? Can we not tolerate that? We don't want to be those, we got to be those people that say, okay, I recognize this is a problem, but from up to here and no further. We're calling it a stop here. We can't live with compromised relationships, compromised covenant relationships. See, God is serious about covenant, and God is serious about relationships, and so should we. And it's just a word of warning. If you find yourself in a lukewarm marriage, if you find yourself drifting in your mind, if you see little orange flags, little warning signs, it's not a big thing, but it may be just a small thing. Hey, don't let the small things become big things. Before you know it, you're on a Coldplay concert on screen. You don't want to go there. You want to stop before that and arrest those thoughts and bring things back to health. So let's be serious about our relationships. And if you know that, hey, I need help, this is the time to speak up. This is the time to speak up. We are for one another. We will pray together. We will work things out. We will see victory in the areas that there are darkness and that the areas that there are pain. The third thing is this thing of worship. You see, God is not impressed with just us worshiping on Sundays. A prophetic people is a people that are worshiping God every day of the week. Every day of the week. How does that translate into the way you serve your family? How does that translate into the way you treat your employees? See, is your everyday life an expression of worship? Does your everyday life serve God's purposes, not your purposes? That's when you know you're worshiping God. When it's not about your comfort, when it's not about what is convenient for you, but if it's part of serving God and fulfilling His mandate over your life. And the fourth part is that we are called to be a people who appeal to the mercy of God, expecting God to move. We can face impossible situations when we see victory because of the mercy of God. It's not about the plans we can make. You know, when you've got your back to the wall, don't think, okay, what plan can I make? What plan can I make? It's not about your plans. We're not called to be plan makers. We're called to be a people that ask the Father, Father, what do you want to do in this situation? Give me a revelation of your will, and then I act according to that. You lead, I follow. But when I follow, I'm expecting you to make a way for where you've pulled me into. We're a people that rely on and expect to see the mercy of God. Amen. That's the message of Amos. Let's stand and we're going to pray.